Look, these conversations are going to be pertinent to just trying to understand what could actually be unfolding, but also the needs of the country and what we believe certain constituents also believe the needs of the country are. So why don't we start with another constituent that perhaps has their own say with regards to how they would see things. The DA's finance spokesperson, Mark Burke, joins us for this conversation too. Mark, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it. It's easy to just say, let me get your expectations, but let me rather do this. You're Enoch Godongwana, and you have to be on that podium today and outline the MTBPS. 4 focus areas.
Quite simple. First of all, no new spending. There's absolutely no avenue for us to fund any new government expenditure. We can't increase taxes. South Africans are already overburdened, and by the way, they spend money better than the state does. At the same time, we can't increase our debt levels because our debt service cost is already 22 rand out of every 100. So if I was Enoch standing on the stage, the first thing I'd commit to is no new government expenditure in this budget cycle. The second thing would be to say that while we're not going to be increasing expenditure, we're going to make current expenditure a lot more efficient. Now, we need to be very clear on what we're saying here. We now need to embed, and we hope that this will be announced, and I've asked the Minister, this would be the second thing I would announce, is a embedding of a culture of spending reviews. And what that means is within each department, with every budget cycle, we need to find inefficiencies, we need to announce those, and we need to eliminate them. This would include a range of things, but we're talking about the looting, we're talking about the ghost workers, but we're also talking about departments that have just gotten used to glut over time. We need to cut some of that fat and find efficiency in the way that government spends.
So raising accountability, basically.
Absolutely, and that accountability needs to be practical. We need to make sure that the spending that we incur is efficient. And the reason we need to do this is because South Africans have lost trust in the way that government spends money. And so for us to re-establish that trust, we need to show that we're spending money responsibly. The third thing is, as we've now said, when there can be no new spending, there can be no new taxes, whether that's income tax increases, corporate tax increases, or value-added tax. And then finally, what I would announce is I would talk about the acceleration of the reforms needed to get the economy going again. Sometimes we can talk in broad terms about the economy and people sort of check out, but you just need to understand this. When government is raising about 27% of the GDP through this mechanism of taxation, then the best way to make sure that you've got more revenue to fund critical social services and otherwise is to grow the economy. And unless we get these reforms accelerated, the economy will not grow. We need to make sure our ports are efficient, our railway is working, our support industries are working, electricity is devolved, and so on. And if we get these things right, if we get these 4 things right, if the DA had a Minister of Finance to announce the speech today, we genuinely believe that we can get South Africa firing again, and this place is a rocket ship waiting to go off.
Let me challenge you on that then. If you're going to challenge the reforms that we need to put in place, won't those change your spending priorities, ultimately meaning you may spend differently, which means you could spend more, meaning you could need more money, which goes against 2 of the 3 things you've just made note of?
The reality is finding inefficiencies does not need to change your spending priorities. But let's assume for a moment that you're right. Let's say that we now identify through these spending reviews things that need to be done more efficiently. One of the unintended terrible consequences of the sprawling bureaucracy that is our state at the moment is it actually gets in the way of people wanting to do things. So when we have a department that's only responsibility is issuing licenses, and those licenses then become a compliance exercise because somehow people think of that compliance exercise as a job creator. Instead of saying we need to get out of the way of industry, we need to get out of the way of individuals. And by the way, South Africans are extremely resilient and are innovative. They just get stuff done. We need to get out of their way. So it's our contention that as much as we're able to limit the influence of the state and how people do things, the more the economy will take off. So by implication, it's then our contention that if we're able to make our spending more efficient, we'll have less of a bureaucratic state, and people will be able to participate in the economy a bit more freely.
The worry for people might be, though, however, that some services then stop being free, stop being able to be had by people because they've been taken over by maybe private institutions, by ordinary South Africans, and then it becomes for profit as opposed to for the people. And that could be a primary issue where government needs to take further responsibility. Should we not be entrenching and making government far more responsible, far more able to do these things in an efficient manner?
I have a lot of empathy for the position that the DA is always trying to privatize, which is not our intention in all cases. But the simple answer to your question is, it would seem to me that if you could, you would. And if the state was able to make itself more efficient, responsible, not have Tembisa looting examples, then we wouldn't see that. So it seems to me that the more the state can get out of people's lives while focusing on the critical things that we do need the state to provide, such as education, such as healthcare, such as policemen and women, those things need to remain in place, and in fact we need to double down on those investments for society. And at the same time, the DA is not proposing that we cut any social spending, but what we are saying is we need to be more responsible in how this gets allocated. When we know that there are issues with how broken NSFAS is, when we can read in the news about how broken SASSA is, the DA is not saying those things need to be taken away. The DA is saying those things need to be made better, and then where the state is getting in the way of the private sector, where license issuing is actually the issue of an industry taking off. And the media is one example here, but there are many others. If the state can just get out of the way, things might just run a bit better.
All right, Mark, very interesting. Thank you so much for that. DA finance spokesperson there, Mark Burke, joining us for that conversation. It's not done actually yet, because we do have Zohra de Villiers as well, partner for Global Mobility and Employment Tax Advisory at KPMG. Zohra, thank you so much for the time. Appreciate it. Let me perhaps start with what you thought of what you just heard now from Mark Burke from the DA.
Thank you very much and good morning. Good points raised there. I think today the Minister of Finance will provide further information regarding tax collections as well as government spending. We've seen some positive trends in terms of the collection of taxes, and the first one is that for the first 6 months of this financial year, SARS actually collected 47 billion rand in taxes of those that owed it long outstanding taxes. So and then almost half of this, 49% related to value added tax. So we can see that the focus for SARS on tax compliance and the use of technology is actually paying off. The second point that we saw is the figures released by National Treasury. It shows that there's been an increase in tax collections over the prior period, over the prior year, and that includes value-added tax, corporate income tax, and personal income tax. All shows growth over the prior year. So this bodes well for our tax deficit, and I just want to add there in terms of personal income tax. For 3 years in a row, we had no adjustments to the tax brackets for inflation. And although that brought into the tax budget 19.5 billion rand, it does impact the taxpayer and consumers negatively and puts them in a worse position. So if we look at what also happened earlier this year, where there was a proposal for a VAT increase, and where did we land? We had our third budget in May, and it was only approved at that time. So clearly, based on our experience there, taxpayers, there's just no appetite for any increase in tax rates.
So let's just say I'm an ordinary South African at this stage, as I actually am anyway, but I'm looking for change. I'm looking for something to happen right now. I'm looking for this medium-term budget policy statement to say something to me that is of effect. What do you think that could be?
Yeah, in terms of the past, this budget, there's normally no tax proposals, but the minister may give us an indication of what will come next year. And we're hoping that there will be some relief for our taxpayers and our households.
In the form of?
In terms of making an adjustment to the tax brackets, that's the first thing. And then also just in terms of medical tax credits, because there's been discussions that is going to be taken away, and that we need. Because obviously the other item on the table is the national health insurance, and where's that funding going to come from? There's just no more appetite for increased tax rates. So we have to make do with what we have. And as the gentleman said, we need to look at growth. With coming off the grey listing, we must really focus on our infrastructure, on our governance, and just the ease of doing business in South Africa, because we would want to be attractive for investment and for foreigners to come into the country.
This may be just maybe slightly out of your purview, and I'm sorry if I do head in that direction, but we've not been taken off the grey list. Does that change the way we get income, our finances? Does that mean we get more money, more investment as a country? Because on the other side, we still have corruption, and we're talking about it right here on these steps of Parliament, right, when it comes to the ad hoc committee into police corruption, etc. So is there a way to say that because we're now off the grey list that things will be better financially?
I think, we've already seen the impact of that. But what your point that you raise is obviously 100% correct, because taxpayers don't mind paying taxes, but they want to know that when the tax is collected, it's actually spent in the most beneficial way for the country. Yeah. So corruption must be eroded. We must look at, the government must look at fruitless and wasteful expenditure in the state-owned entities. And once we get that right, there'll be more money to spend in those areas that really need it.
Zohra, thank you so much for the time. Really, really appreciate it. Zohra de Villiers there from KPMG, helping us just kind of understand a clear sense of what could be expected, what is set out and possibly put forward here, even from the DA's spokesperson, really highlighting what may be needed. Perhaps the state pulling away a little bit and letting South Africans do the task at hand and building the country that they feel that they deserve. That's the